Hello, Bellaire. My name is Jeff Kass. I am the author of the Michigan Notable Book for 2020, Teacher slash Pizza Guy. And I am very sad that I'm not able to do this reading live with y'all in person. I was really looking forward to doing that, but obviously current circumstances are making that impossible. So this is the best we will do. I will try to read some poems for y'all, talk a little bit about my work, and let you know a little bit about me. And I thank you very much for the questions that you have proffered in my direction, and I will do my best to answer them over the course of this presentation. So thank you so much for having me and for tuning in. I hope all is well up there, and I hope to visit someday. So I am a teacher. I teach at Pioneer High School down here in Ann Arbor. I teach 10th grade English, and I teach creative writing, and I've been doing that since about 1998. I also, at that time, founded the Literary Arts program at the Ann Arbor Teen Center, the Neutral Zone, and directed that for about 20 years. And worked there for about 20 hours a week in addition to my full-time teaching at Pioneer. I have also taught creative writing for 4 years at Eastern Michigan University, and done a number of other things, some of which I will talk about today in our presentation. But I wanted to start with a poem that I wrote a long time ago. It's kind of an elegy. And it is for one of my favorite writers. And since I'm speaking under the auspices of a library, I like to read this poem of one of my favorite American poets called Theodore Geisel. Dr. Seuss did not like green eggs and ham. Surgeon of make-em-up wordamology he am. He spun rhyme rhythms like gyrating hurricanes, spreading storm clouds of literacy where Zizuzas from Liluza hop freight trains, where yop yop lop lop skip scotch lollipops hips swaying to chicka chicka who beat of who's down in Whoville as we brothered up soul bonds with all manner of creatures bearded and bird-billed. He liked shuckawucks and saddlebups drinking yink pink ink in coffee cups, but he did not like green eggs and ham. And he detested man's inhumanity to man. Did you know that about him? We all know the Seuss metronome clicks in our subconscious. Between bebop and hip-hop that there was hop, 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 I am a yop. And I'm still propping open Seuss stories for my children, watching their eyes grow big like cereal bowls when the Grinch's heart grows from two sizes too small. They giggle repeatedly as the Grinch carves roast beast contentedly, and I'm immersed in my poetry, chanting it over and over like we got guns and we're not afraid to fire them, and the plagiarist religion permeates with surgical precision, and I realize I'm earning a freestyle doctorate in Seussology, inculcating cadence from our collective cultural memory. One fish, two fish, there, here, far, near, Lorax battalions marching ear to ear forward, backward, Seuss's words like Zeus thundering rhyme bolts that teach children how to read. When it comes right down to it. And Seuss knew it through it and through it. The greatest power in this universe is imagination. And Seuss taught us cats and hats can prance through front doors on rainy days when there's nothing to do. Trailing high, flying kite flyers, thing one and thing two. While funny things everywhere cavort with fish red and fish blue. And on a dust speck on a clover, Horton, here's a who. Seuss taught us a horse and wagon can morph into a parade of elephants, mayors and sultans. A cacophony of magicians, brass bands, and confetti resulting. And to think we first saw it on Mulberry Street, our imaginations growing like Grinch's hearts, dancing to the beat. Thank you. That was my tribute to the great American writer, Dr. Seuss. Yeah, and I think this idea of imagination being the greatest power in the universe is something that I try to communicate to my students as much as possible. And particularly in this time of civic unrest, in this time of ravaging illness, I think imagining a way out of it or imagining a way to the other side for my students is crucial. A lot of them have mental health issues. A lot of them are just feeling very down, like there's nothing to be inspired about right now, nothing to look forward to, and they're having a difficult time. And so for me, what I try to do as a teacher is try to help them understand that the way things are right now are not necessarily the way that they're going to be forever, and that if they can imagine a bright future or a brighter future, then they can work to achieve that, and that that's something that they can look forward to. I try to explain to them that some studies have demonstrated that Holocaust survivors, people who survived the absolute horrors of that time of history, many of them chalked up their ability to survive to the idea of imagination, of imagining a world beyond the walls, and the fences, electrified fences of the concentration camps, imagining a world that would be more just. And hopefully that's where we are right now too, is in a place of imagining that things will get better. And I understand that things are starting to look a little better up north where you guys are, and things are starting to open up more, and man, that is great. And I hope that everyone stays healthy up there and manages to survive. So one of the questions that people are asking me is, how is the distance learning going? What's that working like? So right now I have 4 sections of 10th grade English, which is about 120 students, and I've got about 25 more creative writing students. I would say it's very difficult to continue teaching in this remote fashion. I think all of my students probably thrive much more on face-to-face interactions and the energy of the group being together, especially in creative writing where we're sharing our stories with each other and being vulnerable and offering feedback. We can replicate some of those activities online through Google Meet or Zoom, but it's just not the same. And obviously, we can't have the same kind of spontaneity on a regular basis that we have in a classroom. So it's tough. I think that I've been trying really hard to make this a worthwhile learning experience for my students. We've been out of school, or will have been out of school, for 12 weeks by the end of this school year. And I try to send them an email every single morning with a little joke of the day, some reflection responses to questions I'd asked in the day previously, and a new writing lesson or literature lesson in some fashion that will keep them motivated and keep them going. That's been a lot of hard work for me, but I think for maybe half to 2/3 of my students, it's been an experience that's still worthwhile for them in terms of what they're learning and how they're growing. It hasn't been easy, and it's much, much harder to reach everybody this way, but we've managed to do it to some degree. I would not want to look forward to a future of just online teaching. You just miss so much about having everyone there and in the same room and feeling the same energy. That said, we're doing what we can. This is a strange time, and hopefully eventually we'll get back to some more teaching with everybody in the classroom. That is what I look forward to. Okay, so another question was, do I teach poetry to my students? And the answer is absolutely, right? In my creative writing class, I teach poetry and fiction and creative nonfiction, but the students tend to write poems for the most part, because when we're critiquing each other, a poem is the easier piece of writing to critique logistically and in terms of time, and it just seems to work out more. With my sophomores, teaching literature, so we do look at novels, we read Lord of the Flies, we read the play Fences, we read the book The Natural, which I will allude to later in a poem, and a few other things, short stories and poems. But I try to work poems in throughout the year so that they can compare what we're talking about in a book to what a poet said in a poem about a similar theme, and we can have interesting conversations about that. I am right now in the throes of a year-ending poetry unit with them, which I think is probably the best thing that we can be doing, because I'm giving them the opportunity to process their experiences now, to write about their feelings, their observations, everything that's happening in this time. So yes, I teach poetry to them all the time. Don't really teach too many classic poets, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, those types of poets. Every once in a while, I'll throw in one of those classic poems, but for the most part, I kind of figure they're going to get those poets from other teachers, and I try to introduce them to some of the really wonderful contemporary poets that are out there right now, like Patricia Smith or Patrick Rosal or Ross Gay. Angel Nafis, just people I think that are going to be super compelling to them and that they can learn a lot from. So I try to give them those kinds of experiences and use poetry to really get them connected to the world around them and to what we're talking about in literature. And it seems to be working well, and they've written some phenomenal poems and sent them back to me, which is part of what's really hard is I'm trying to process probably 200 poems a week right now in terms of giving feedback to my students. So let me read a poem about my students that comes from the book Teacher/Pizza Guy. And so this is a book which chronicles the 2016-2017 school year when, in addition to working at the Teen Center 20 hours, being a full-time teacher, writing on my own, just to meet the bills, I still had to work a couple nights a week delivering pizzas for Cottage Inn. Note the headgear to cover my failure to achieve domestic bliss with my coronavirus haircut here. Anyway, this is a poem called Classroom Door Open, and it's a poem about sort of the beginning of the school year and seeing kids from the year ago. Classroom door open, and a student from last year walks by while we're deeply immersed in our weekly vocab quizzing. He's taller now. His shirt fits the shelf of his shoulders with less droop. How do 10 weeks of summer change so much? The quiz, a half-decade old, dodders. It's Hannah Montana jokes wheezing. Still, I push it like an old wheelbarrow stuffed with fresh soil. Spread it enough around, something can still bloom. I don't believe in the new technology, individualized quizzes with each silent kid stickered to his own computer screen. I want community. We learn a dozen words in chorus, pronounce them aloud, fill in the blanks as if we're attending a boisterous town hall meeting. This is the moment last year a student struts by, cocks his head toward the doorway, smiles sideways as if to say, I'm past all that now, thank God. But thank God, too, that was me last year. I know what 10th grade will bring those kids sitting there for the next 9 months. At least I've learned that much. You keep pushing that wheelbarrow, Mr. Kass. Keep spreading those stale, dumb jokes. Keep pushing. Keep spreading. I guess that also gets to what I think is so important about live in-person teaching. Just that sense of community that can't be replicated with each kid sort of learning at their own pace. You know, we sometimes just learning together is the most powerful element of the learning experience. And that's one of the things we're really missing with this distance learning model. I wanted to read another poem that's brand new. This poem, I want to say it's a few weeks old at this point, but early on in this quarantine experience, while going for a walk, and I like to go for a walk most days, try to get out in the open air, I noticed a house in my neighborhood which had a huge sign out the front kind of bay window, which was just kind of encouraging everyone going through this experience. And so I was reacting to that as well as reacting to some of the things that were happening in my life. So, the poem's called How Are You Today? We Think You Rock. How are you today? We think you rock, reads the homemade sign trumpeting from the picture window above the navy blue front door. Writ large and colorful, sometimes striped, sometimes polka-dotted letters. It must have been an early project in quarantine, perhaps middle schoolers or late elementary. I like to think it was their own idea, not mom's or dad's. How can we reach out to people struggling out there? Can't we do anything? How am I today? I'm numb. My first attempt at an online discussion with my 10th graders proved a disaster. Audio garbled, almost intolerable, until the internet, fed up with my flubbing, kicked me all the way to the curb. Made me cyber self-isolate just when a girl named Ashley was about to say something about how William Golding was portraying his dark vision of human nature in Lord of the Flies. Later, Edward, another student, sent me an email. Just to be clear, the meeting ended when your Wi-Fi cut out, right? Yes, Edward, the meeting ended. I do not much feel like I rock. Trees do not care about this virus. They still ache to bud on this battleship gray early day of spring. People dot sidewalks, walking like I am 6 to 12 feet apart from anyone else. We cross the street when we encounter couples or families of dog walkers who cannot so easily maneuver, offer shy, polite waves as if to say, I'm sorry I cannot be closer. I don't want to get you sick or for you to get me sick. This distance and this now is how it has to be. So thank you for that sign from above. I walk toward the empty bocce court in the park, watch people throw sticks to their dogs in the enclosed area that never became a skating rink this too warm winter, gaze at the basketball hoop where my son fails in his attempts to dunk. I don't rock right now. Can't feel like that when a friend texts a journalist he mentored has died. Another wonders how she can advocate for her partner, only now breaking through cancer if he becomes hospitalized and doctors have to ration their choices. Rocking is tough today, but I'll try, sign makers. Trust me, I'll try. Yeah. Okay, it's kind of interesting just talking all like this. So one other question that one of y'all asked was, I love these questions, by the way. Y'all did really great questions. Why do you choose to express your thoughts into poetry rather than prose? I love that question. I do write a lot of prose. I write a lot of fiction. I have a short story collection called Knuckleheads that won a big award in 2011 as the best short fiction collection of the year. You can check it out. I have a thriller based on an imagined murder during the Michigan State football weekend in Ann Arbor called Takedown. And I'm working on a young adult novel right now about a high school field hockey team. So I do write a ton of fiction, and I really enjoy writing prose in fiction. And I write essays too. Well, I'll get back to that in a second. But I think for the most part, when I am trying to process real life experiences, things that have happened to me or things that are happening in the world, things that I've witnessed, things that I'm thinking about, that just tends to come out in poems. I have written a book of essays, a short book of essays called From the Front of the Room about being a teacher. But more often than not, I think the act of putting words together in a poem helps me to dig a little deeper, to isolate the moment and kind of boil it down to its essence and then start exploring, digging deeper underneath it. So while I love writing prose, I tend to reserve that genre mostly for fiction, where I can let my imagination run wild and be very creative and tell stories that didn't happen. But when I'm thinking about stories that did happen and I'm searching for the meaning, it just tends to come out more in poems. Now, that doesn't mean it always does. I am attempting. Someone else asked if I still have a second job. I'm not delivering pizzas anymore. But for the past several months prior to the quarantine situation, I was driving Lyft. And I would drive Lyft probably 6 nights a week and probably put in somewhere between 12 and 15 hours. And driving Lyft is also a very interesting experience. And I was working on a series of essays about that. So my next book, perhaps, may be a series of essays about the experience of being a rideshare driver. Although it's possible that might morph into poems too. Then I think about that. But I've started on a book of essays there. So I love writing both prose and poetry, but tend, when I'm working on real life situations, telling true stories, to process those stories more as poems. Which leads me to my next poem. So this is an example of formal verse. Most of my poems are written in free verse, but this is written in a old ancient Persian form, which is thousands of years old, called the ghazal, which includes a kind of rhyme and refrain at the end of each line. It's written in couplets, and so that means 2-line stanzas. And what you're trying to do is you have a kind of repeating word that finishes up at the end of each stanza, each line, each stanza, that's right. And then you have a rhyming refrain right before it. So this kind of gets to the pizza delivery experience and that old saying that the customer's always right, and that's just not true. So I think you'll hear the rhymes in here, and I'm going to clean up the language a little bit in the book that's a little more racy. Okay. So it's called Wrong City Hustle. You're called to deliver an order to Linwood Street. Traffic tangles, rain mangles, you search for the thin good street. A woman cursed your manager after another driver failed. Now he assigns you the task. Locate her dim, rude street. You circumnavigate. The GPS prevaricates. You scan dark, unnumbered homes. There's no 905 Linwood Street. The customer curses your call. What the wrong with you? I'm out here waiting on Linwood Street. You exit your car. Look left. Right. No one. Nothing. Cold air like pliers on your neck on this no-wind lewd street. You ignore the why the hell are you doing this in your brain? You use your most polite voice. Are you sure you're on Linwood Street? Yes, I'm sure, ya moron. What are you, stuck in an alternate universe with a twin hood street? A magical emerald appears in your mind. You are in Ann Arbor, right? Zip code 48104 on Linwood Street? No, clown, she says. Kalamazoo. And then she pauses, hangs up. No apology for ordering food 90 miles from her slim good street. And you, Jeff, stand in the slush, tipless, a half hour wasted, holding a still full pizza bag on Linwood Street. It was rough. That year, 2016-17, was very difficult. You can imagine sort of the idea of being out there in the cold, delivering pizzas, working from a shift that starts at 6 o'clock and ends maybe at 4 in the morning, washing dishes in the back room, and it's past 4 in the morning, but the dishes still got to get done, so you don't leave the store until 5. And then you have to get up about an hour and a half later to get ready for school, be in school by 7:45, teach all day long. Who knows, go out again the next night delivering pizzas. So it was exhausting and a very, very difficult year. And I think that's what makes the book really political, is because I'm not only teacher out there working a second job, right? And we have enough to deal with already in terms of just like 150 students, 140 students, and the very difficult lives they have, the emotional investment that comes with being a teacher and trying to understand your students and help them to learn and to grow is not easy. And I know that year, 2016-17, was probably one of my worst years as a teacher. I was so exhausted all the time that even if it didn't matter how hard I tried, there's just no way. I had the capacity to be able to deal with everything my students are going through and be patient and try to be helpful and try to be creative in my lesson planning and what I was doing and being quick on my feet, throughout the day. Because as a teacher, you have to be on the whole day long. You can't mail it in. That's not working with 30 teenagers sitting in front of you. So it's just hard. Very, very difficult. So one of the questions here kind of was asking me about, were my family members surprised by any of these poems? And, I tried as much as possible to kind of keep how difficult that year was away from not only my immediate family who could already sense it, but also from, my parents and other people, because I don't want them worrying about me all the time while I'm out there driving in the middle of the night. In that sense, this book is very, very difficult for me to put out in public because I don't necessarily want my family to know how painful that was and to understand the depths of exhaustion and desperation, really, that I was feeling during that year. So that's tough. On the other hand, I think it's important to tell this story because, like I said, I think this book represents a lot of teachers and what a lot of teachers are going through. So I didn't want to keep these poems to myself. I wanted them out there so that people could understand when they have an argument about what teachers should be paid or what their working conditions should be, that they understand some of the true life stories of teachers. So hard it is as it is for me and for my family to read these poems, I thought it was necessary to put them out there. So I'll just say that. Another question someone had was, have I ever delivered pizzas to my students? Yes, I have delivered pizzas to my students' families, and that's been pretty tricky. But I also, told my students up front that I'm working for Cottage Inn these days, and this is what's happening with me, because I'm not ashamed of it. I want them to understand that that's what teachers are going through at this school. So that's hard, but there are harder things in terms of delivering. So one of the harder things was delivering to a former student, who I had written a recommendation letter for to have that kid go to U of M. And that student ordered pizza at like 3 a.m. And I went there to deliver it, and the student was just totally drunk. And now it's a really weird situation, because here's his former high school teacher who wrote him a recommendation, seeing him behaving badly, right? And not pursuing his studies to the degree that the teacher promised that he would in the recommendation. Meanwhile, that same teacher who he respected and admired is out there at 3 a.m. delivering pizzas to support his family. So that could be really awkward. That was a really difficult situation. Another one that is perhaps the hardest, though, is delivering to my peers who I know. So Ann Arbor, is a medium-sized city, I would say, and I'm working at the pizzeria basically in my neighborhood, so I would deliver to parents of my daughter and my son's friends. That's hard. These are the same parents that were on the sidelines at field hockey games or baseball games talking about the team or talking about politics or whatever. And here's that guy that people think is this respected school teacher out there delivering pizzas. That's hard because it feels to me like an admission of failure. Like, I'm your age, here are our kids out there playing ball together, and you are not failing the way I am. That's forcing me in life to be out here delivering pizzas at, whatever time. So that's hard. That was probably the hardest. And it was always awkward because, nobody wants to sort of acknowledge the situation that I'm having a hard time supporting my family, so I'm out here delivering pizzas. We're just trying to be polite, and I'm kind of hoping they're going to tip a couple of dollars, and that's it, right? But that was awkward, and that was really hard. On the other hand, there are moments where you deliver a pizza, and it's just kind of something sort of magical, right? And you become more than just that person providing food. So here's a poem called Garbage Day, which I'll get to some of my thoughts about education a little later, but this is a poem about one of those deliveries that was just a kind of interesting interaction. Garbage Day. Not the kind where you haul the bin to the curb. Just a trashity trash, negative $76 in my bank account, 3-hour mornings stuffed with hectoring juniors to abandon their phones in the front of the room, sequester calculators beneath their desks, and refrain from thinking about sex during the multi-million-dollar mind-murkifying mud mess otherwise known as the ACT. Then, a lunchtime sophomore giving a half-assed miss-class makeup speech about video game theme music that fails to include a single actual example of video game theme music, followed by yet another staff meeting devoted to genuflecting toward the two-headed deity of this district-wide common assessment and uploading data, and my shift hasn't started well either. After blowing out a tire on the highway and then blowing $200 for 2 new ones, my car, in lieu of purring gratitude, offers instead a whining growl, as if it devoured a sour ball-bearing sandwich, and I'm in free-fall denial that this dying porpoise whale pretends any further outlays for repairs, and my first 3 runs are nothing worth celebrating. A $2 tip, $1.66 a stiff, and when I pull up to the high-rent high-rise, I'm surprised at the enthusiasm of the customer when I call and say, "Hi, this is Jeff from Cottage Inn. How you doing?" "I'm fantastic," he says. "Really, really terrific." And every octave in his voice sings he means it. And he promises to be down in the lobby in less than a minute. So I scuttle from my car to meet him, and he's wearing an off-white t-shirt featuring a blood-red illustration of the Rosetta Stone or some other ancient document hand-carved in cuneiform, and he smiles like a construction zone floodlight and tips $4.19 on a $15.81 bill and says, "I just got a job." Theoretically, I understand that's good news, but in practice, with 3 of them and a still negative account balance, it's difficult to muster much positive affirmation. Nonetheless, I fake it and ask for more particulars. We establish amidst a rush of bubbly gushes he'll be a tour guide at the Science Museum, and sure, that sounds awesome. Then he adds, "You're the first person I taught this to." What, I wonder, is the electric current of such an assertion? Did the man startle himself, blurting his good fortune to a stranger? Are we both embarrassed that I, dude pulling $5.25 an hour plus tips, am the person he chose to favor with his bliss? Perhaps to cover the awkwardness of his vulnerability, or maybe just to demonstrate my own tomfoolery, I reach for my most pretentious vocabulary. "Well, I'm honored to be the recipient of such glad tidings." He looks at me like maybe he made a mistake trusting me with his joy. He didn't, for suddenly I am joyful too. I am not just the conveyor of pies and breadsticks. I am the sounding board for somebody's moment. I am the human ear that heard a human mouth cascade with light. Take that, future drone who will one day drop pies from the sky. And again, I think that poem's kind of commenting on the importance of human connection, face-to-face relationships, and sometimes the delivery person is the only person we've seen here over the past few weeks if we happen to order a pizza or something like that, right? So, I don't know. We're going in that direction. Pieces will arrive via drone or automatic car, and what will we lose when that happens? That person who knocks on the door, maybe talks to you a minute, maybe you have some conversation with them, right? Yeah. I would say one of the questions that's been asked too is, have I always wanted to be a writer, or have I always been a writer? The answer is yes. I have written ever since I was a young kid. I think my first book was a nonfiction group of short essays when I was about 6 called War. And it was during the Vietnam War, I think, so it's probably early 70s. And it talked about people could get killed in war, and that was very sad. So that was the beginning of my writing. Wrote mostly fiction throughout my younger days when I was a kid, and continued to do that in college, and sort of picked up poetry later on when I became a teacher. And when I was asking my students to write poems, I wanted to write poems to them to show them that I was willing to do the same thing I'm asking them to do. And that's really where I started writing poems, and that was when I was teaching in the Bay Area. And my brother James Kass was starting an organization at the time called Youth Speaks, which sort of became the leader of the national youth spoken word movement. And we kind of grew up in that movement together, and I was inspired by the work he was doing to really introduce a lot of poetry to my students, a lot of contemporary poetry, spoken word, performance poetry. And I really kind of became a big part of that world. And so that's where my kind of love from poetry continued to develop and grow and evolve. And, I've been writing fiction the whole time too. So one of the things that happens with a lot of my poems is that, sometimes I'll have a bunch of failed poems, but there's kind of like small pieces of each poem that I think is interesting, and that turns into a poem that eventually works when I combine all those different poems in small pieces. And that's kind of what happened with this one, and this is one of my favorite poems in the book. And it also is a comment on education. I'm going to kind of talk about some of the things I really believe about education after this. So this poem, when I was teaching in California in the early 90s, I was teaching in a huge school with 4,400 students just south of the Bay Area. And it was in the gang era in the early 90s. So there were a lot of gang fights, a lot of violence in that school. I remember one time I had to break up a fight between two freshman girls right outside of my classroom, and they had two girls were beating up a third girl, and they were kind of bashing her head with one of those combination locks that you find in a gym locker, and just tearing gashes all through her forehead. It was awful. But we used to have 5 or 10 fights a week. It was really, really terrible. And at the time, kids would listen to music. It was on the old Sony Discman, and they had the little foam headphones on, and we had a policy at our school that we did not want those kids to have those items on campus. It was distracting. We didn't want them listening to music and all that. The community assistants or hall monitors at the time, after a while, just got really tired of that rule. And they came to the staff and said, look, we're having confrontation after confrontation after confrontation with the students every day. Why can't we just let them listen to their music, during lunchtime or between classes? What's the big deal? So as a staff, we voted, okay, let's do that. And we, said you can wear your headphones and listen to your music during lunch and in passing time between periods. The net result is that fighting in the school declined precipitously, like 70%, because kids were just more chilled out and would listen to their music and were less interested in kind of confronting each other over perceived grievances. And that was very interesting. And of course, when I came to Pioneer in Ann Arbor, we had a similar rule, and still do, that students are not supposed to wear headphones in school, and I've been trying to advocate that maybe we should rethink that, but so far I haven't gotten much luck. This poem is called Young Man, Take Your Headphones Out, and I want to warn you that I will sing during it, and I sing very badly, but I'm not apologizing for that. I believe everyone has the privilege and the right to sing poorly, at least in their poems if they want to. Young man, take your headphones out is the refrain of Ian's poem, and the refrain he hears each morning when he pushes into the building at 7:30, sleet stinging his face. Young man, take your headphones out, Ian hears, and obeys, just long enough to move past the line of sight of the assistant principal yelling at him through a megaphone before he puts them back in. Young man, take your headphones out, Ian hears in his sleep when he eats a foil pack of Pop-Tarts for breakfast as he clambers onto his bicycle and whatever the weather, rides it to school. Young man, take your headphones out, I hear, as I pull into traffic, seeing Ian's anguished face as he sits atop the classroom radiator, hearing his throaty voice when he reads his poem, as I half listen to the radio, late already, on my way to deliver my 20th pizza of the night. Young man, take your headphones out, I hear, as the first few notes from Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You play through the car speakers, and despite my tardiness, I pull over into a 7-Eleven parking lot. Young man, take your headphones out, Ian repeats as the anchor of his poem, a custody-sharing tale of 3 days a week with his father, 4 with his mother. Young man, take your headphones out, as he rides his bike back and forth between parents. The only thing he takes with him everywhere, his music. The only stability in his life, on his bike, in the hallways, in his head, his music. Young man, take your headphones out, disappears as I sit in the parking lot, engine running for 3 minutes, just so I can hear Whitney drag out that long about 5-6 of the way through that song, and how just that single stretched out vowel, that one sparkling sound, will buoy me through the rest of this shift, maybe the rest of the week, the school year, who knows, maybe even my whole damn career. So that was obviously like a rule in my school that I have issues with. And somebody asked if you could choose 3 things necessary to improve education in Michigan right now, what would they be? So I guess that first one would have to be this idea of standardization. We have these kind of rules and policies that we think should apply to everybody, but really, we're not accounting for the individual struggles and stories of what all our students are going through. So I think as much as possible that we can work on a new governing philosophy, which is less about standardization, which means fewer standardized tests, fewer standardized lesson plans, fewer kind of aligned curriculums that are mandated for everybody to do, and try to look at people a little bit more as individuals, both the teachers and students. I think that would make a big difference. That would allow us to have better human-to-human relationships with each other, and hopefully get the best out of every student. Because I think that's one of the hardest things, is students don't like being shoved in particular boxes, and teachers don't either. It's just difficult to get the best. I mean, for me as a teacher, I try to resist almost any notion that tells me I need to be doing what every other 10th grade teacher is trying to do. I need to be doing what's going to make me excited to be a teacher. And because what makes me excited in the classroom is going to be what's going to make my students excited. And that might not be the same thing that works for another teacher, right? And what I do, other teachers might not, can't make it work either. So I think it's really, really important to allow both students and teachers to express themselves individually, but within the context of the community, right? We don't want to just send everyone home to sit in front of their computer screen and do digitized worksheets either at their own pace. What I'm talking about is a deeper level of individuality. It's like respecting the humanity and dignity of each student and each teacher, and allowing each to flourish according to what they need and what they can do. So that would be number 1. I think that also bleeds right into number 2, which is students' mental health is like a huge issue right now. I would say 20 to 30% of my students have mental health issues in one way or another. Anxiety, depression, OCD, all kinds of different issues. And I think there are a couple of things that would be really tangible and easy for us to deal with. One is, let the school day start a little later. Let these students sleep in a little bit, right? Let it start at 10 o'clock instead of 7:45. Let them sleep in. And I don't even know if we need to go have as many hours in the classroom to make it work. I think if they're from 10 to 3 and it's quality over quantity, that could be just as good as 7:45 to 3:30. And I think we might get more productivity and more growth out of them. So I would advocate for that. And then I would also advocate for less homework. A lot of homework that gets assigned is busy work. And I don't think that busy work does anything for anybody. And I don't think we need to teach students to be miserable staying up late or pulling all-nighters on homework that they're not necessarily learning a lot from. I try to believe that if I have my students for 53 minutes a day, I should be able to give them everything they need in those 53 minutes. They might have some reading assignments they have to do at night, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. They might have some long-term projects of essays that if they spaced out wouldn't be very long either. But I really do not believe in a lot of busy work homework. I think that makes students stay up late. It creates all kinds of inequities, and I think it contributes to mental health challenges. So I say, let's give the students a really impactful time when they're at school, 5 solid hours, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock, like really good stuff, and then let them have the rest of the day. Play sports, be with their family, pursue other interests, music or whatever it is. Let them get a job and not sort of destroy themselves. And, I think that would be really useful. And then, I guess finally, obviously, would be, to somehow compensate teachers in a way that they don't have to be out there at 3 a.m. working, right? It helps nobody for the teacher to be out to 3, 4, 5 in the morning trying to make enough money to support their family and then come in to school at 7:45 the next day. I don't think that's good for anyone. So I would say that. Okay, I just have 2 more poems for y'all, and then I think we'll call it a day here. I wanted to read this other new poem because it is kind of dealing with this time of the virus and what that's been like for me. And part of what is tough is just the way that time has felt so different. And I like to feel like I'm going forward in my life, but feeling like stuck in the mud and like spinning wheels and not getting anywhere. And I think this is kind of getting to that. There are a lot of references here to the New York Yankees. I don't apologize for that either. I grew up in New York, so I still have loyalty to my team from back there. But so please, excuse me for that. Okay, this poem's called Amongst the Wonders of Modern Technology. Amongst the wonders of modern technology, I can now listen to radio broadcasts of baseball games played a year ago. That is particularly useful given the absence of baseball games now. Since I eschew earbuds, it's a bit freaky when I walk past people on the street at least 6 feet apart. Are they just far enough away to doubt their senses? Do they actually hear crowds roaring? The call of a loud blast off the center field wall, or a curveball drifting across the plate for a resounding strike three? In this time of stop time, I am surprisingly invested in the outcomes of baseball games played in the spring of 2019. I punch my fist when Gleyber Torres mashes a home run already enumerated on the back of his baseball card. Or Aroldis Chapman induces a one-hopper to short, and the voice of the Yankees proclaims from the past, the Yankees win! The Yankees win! Everybody wants momentum. Does the dream deferred of a high school senior preening at prom, or walking across the stage in tottering high heels to shake the ungloved hand of a principal sentence that kid's phantom to haunt hallway lockers for 50 semesters? What is a yearbook in a year where the calendar hits pause in mid-March? I watch high school students Zoom sing a rousing rendition of One More Day from their canceled production of Les Miserables. A Brady Bunch gallery of earbud and rap teenagers raising voice in concert from the stage cage of their own homes, faces red with passion for a play that will never be performed in their buzzing school auditorium, and I am broken, my shoulders and face shaking as if I'm ravaged by the virus itself. I can't help but long with them for one more day, a single day more with students together in our classroom, crowded with questions, boredom, and the occasional light bulb moment. I cannot help but sing along with the cast of Parks and Recreation in their reunion when they sing, "Bye, bye, little Sebastian," a fictional pony they love in the saddest fashion. When with my cooped-up daughter and son, we spent 2 months worth of nights watching 7 seasons of Leslie Knope freaking out with her colleagues and eating waffle after waffle avalanche with whipped cream as if work and friends or a never-ending ice cream sundae. For 5 weeks on Sundays, we took a break from Parks and Rec to watch Michael Jordan break ankles in the 90s while the class of 2020 has its last dance deferred and the NBA hits pause before the playoffs. The nation suffers 40 million layoffs, and we all wonder whether these days off will pay off. I wonder if I've aged during this teach from my dining room era, if the mop nest of my hair bulges thicker but no grayer, and the calendar slanders its own good name. How old am I? I find myself grading digital essays submitted to my virtual classroom that features no posters of comic book heroes, or students with heads plastered to desks, or my own messy desk splattered with hard copy handouts with a black box where sophomores were supposed to sequester their smartphones. Yet, I am still reminding writers to use present tense when describing events in literature. A concept I taught in early November when we wrote our first paper of the semester about a story in the age when baseball was the national pastime. How now does our nation pass time? An update during last year's Yankee game informs me Bill Buckner has died at the age of 69. He'd be 70 now if still alive, and I am mourning all over again for a man whose ankles betrayed him on a ground ball in 1986. Present tense, I insist, as if the events in a piece of literature keep happening, are happening right now, as if the story is always hunkered down, lurking in wait. One of the questions was, what is my favorite poem? Or do I have favorite poems in the collection, teacher/pizza guy? And I definitely do. There's one poem called The Manager Talks About Getting Engaged, which is in the center of the book, and it's the heart of the book. And I really did not go into this experience thinking that I would be creating a kind of a collection of poems, but it just sort of happened as things were going along. And I started writing about things that were happening in this experience as a teacher and this experience delivering pizzas. And I still wasn't really thinking I necessarily had a project or a book until I wrote this poem. And when I wrote this poem, I kind of knew that there could be something here. So it's called The Manager Talks About Getting Engaged, and I will be signing off with this poem right here. It's kind of an epic. The manager talks about getting engaged. I think I'm ready, he says. What was it like for you? Did you do anything special? The story is, yes, it was, in fact, special. But not because of any particular planning or creative proposaling. It was spontaneous, and actually, I don't want to talk about it. Despite all my admonitions to students about vanquishing vagueness, it's not a story I'd like to share. It involves Santa Cruz and sea lions and a tall, bearded man playing bagpipes in the midst of a mournful fog. And that's all I'm going to say. This story is for me and for Karen, and maybe one day for our children. I hold it tightly to my chest, and I want to keep it like that. An heirloom. Except it's nearing 5 a.m. when he asks, and I'm mopping the floor, sort of. It's been a long, unnerving night, ice and snow and roads that want to bite, and he's counting money in the register and accomplishing other mysterious paperwork-related functions. I think I made about $105 in tips, add on the 54 cents per mile and the $5.25 an hour salary. I'm around $180 for 11 hours. Not horrible, but the floor sneers daunting and salty, and the water in the mop bucket already swims swampy. So I'm swishing back and forth as quickly as I can, but the truth is the world's not a whole lot cleaner, and my arms and upper back feel like I just survived 6 minutes wrestling against a state champ, so I'm half tempted to tell the story just to cheer my own damn self up. Earlier, a university professor tipped $5 on a $97 bill. And he also declined to meet me at the door in the midst of the snowiest bluster. Sent down a student clearly unprepared to schlep 7 pizzas, including one gluten-free, upstairs to the classroom. So I did it for him. An extra 10 minutes of my time while another customer's delivery camped in the car. And I don't know what kind of class it was. Possibly marketing, something in that how to make money by lying to people genre. About 30 undergrads inhabited the classroom, each likely capable of chipping in a buck, though none offered, and I considered making a public announcement exposing their instructor as a 6% tipper after he asked me a bunch of bullshit questions like, do I get sick of pizza? And does my car smell like pizza? And so much me wanted to say, listen up, students. This dude here who's grading your papers, or more likely forcing that job onto a graduate assistant who gets paid little more than expired lettuce, is trying to make nice with me. Act like he recognizes the complexity of my humanity. But he just tipped $5 on a $97 bill, and you do the math. That adds up to an asshole at the extreme tail of the bell curve. And I got 2 kids I'm not putting to bed right now, not helping with their homework, not standing next to the washroom as they floss and brush their teeth, and I still got 9 hours to go on this shift, and then to sleep 2 hours and snap my sorry ass awake from my son's hockey game. So if you learn one lesson this semester, how about it's every person who's ever served you anything, fed you, or cooked for you, or refilled your coffee, or refolded a sweater you left in a heap after fingering through the bargain rack, every damn one of them might have a magical story comprised of sea lions and bagpipes and mournful fog they hold close to their chests. But I don't see any of that, and I feel smaller for it. I want to be that fiery teacher I once was, unafraid of losing his job, unwilling to compromise a principled belief or stand in muted silence when an explosion's brewing in his throat, and the manager's looking up from his register, his own shoulders looking like pumpkins 3 weeks after Halloween, deflated, nibbled apart by squirrels, and I push the mop harder, trying now to make that floor Cinderella sparkle, for we who close the door at 5 a.m. must be our own fairy godmothers, our own Prince Charmings. There is no one else in this moment for us, no one thinking of us but us. And I polish that floor so it shines like a glass slipper, and the bark of sea lions lurches upwards from hundreds of feet below the craggy cliffs, and it roars onto my tongue. Actually, I say, special doesn't begin to describe. It was in Santa Cruz, and we were on this bluff, and the wind had that kind of chill, like somebody pressing fingernails into the hollow of your back. So I gave her my sweatshirt. It was royal blue, but for some reason, the number 88 sewn onto the front in a white patch. And we could hear some guy playing bagpipes, sending his screeching prayer into the mist. And down below on the beach, sea lions. Down below on the beach, and she looked at me. And we could hear. And she started nodding her head. And I said, "What are you saying yes to? What are you saying yes to?" But I already knew. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope someday I'll be able to come out there and read for y'all in person. And I hope everybody is surviving through this weird time. Thank you, Bellaire Library, for hosting this event. And thank you, the state of Michigan, for selecting Teacher/Pizza Guy as a Michigan notable book. Hope you all have a great night. Thanks. Bye.